Hi, I'm Dustin Abbott, and I'm here today to give you my definitive video review of the Viltrox Pro AF 27mm F1.2. Now this is for Fuji X mount at this point, but as we have seen already with this new Pro series from Viltrox, I would expect to see it for other APS-C mounts as well in the future, including Sony E mount and at least Nikon Z mount, very likely. When the 75mm F1.2 was debuted towards the end of 2022, I was really excited about the notion of it being the first of a new series of lenses. It was such a fantastic lens and such a huge step up in terms of lens development on a lot of levels for Viltrox, and I was hoping that we would see more lenses in the series follow. When I heard that the next would be a 27mm f1.2, I was really excited. That is essentially a 40.5mm equivalent, full frame equivalent on Fuji's 1.5 times APS-C crop factor. So a lens around 40 millimeters is one that's actually a personal favorite from me. It's really versatile, just slightly tighter than what 35 millimeters is, but of course a little bit wider than 50 millimeters, falling right in between those, and I find that it just is very versatile. And as we're going to see, it's a lens I really enjoy. It's something I often reach for, a 40 or 45 millimeter lens. I frequently will reach for that when it's time for family occasions or just capturing life's moments, because there's something about the images that are just really engaging. Now, as we're going to see in this review, this lens, of course, is a little bit large and heavy, as this series has proven to be. But in many ways, I'm going to show how I think it's pretty much a perfect compromise between Fuji's own 23mm f1.4 LM lens and also their 33mm f1.4 LM lenses. It's over $300 cheaper than either one of them. And we're going to see how that it combines some of the best qualities of both of those lenses, though in a larger and heavier package with an f1.2 maximum aperture. That makes it a really intriguing lens, and we'll explore why right after a word from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by Fantom Wallet, the minimalist modern wallet that is now even better with the new Fantom X that is crafted from aluminum right here in Canada. It is 22% smaller and 35% lighter, while still making it easy to access your cards and money when you need them, thanks to their unique fanning mechanism. You could even customize your wallet due to its modular design, with accessories like a money clip, cash holder, ID display, and even Chipolo and AirTag tracking integration. Visit store.fantomwallet.com to check out their unique sizes, styles, and finishes that span from aluminum to wood to carbon fiber, and use code DUSTIN15 for 15% off when you're ready to check out.
So when it comes to the build and the handling, this lens is smaller than its predecessor in the 75mm, but it's slightly smaller. It's not a, it's by no means a compact lens. It is 82 millimeters in diameter, that's 3.22 inches, and that makes it about 5 millimeters narrower than what the 75mm was. It is 92 millimeters in overall length here, or 3.62 inches, which is about 9 millimeters less than what the 75mm was. And it weighs in at 560 grams, that's right under 20 ounces, and that is about 110 grams less than what the 75mm was. Now, to flip that around though from the other perspective, if you're looking at lenses like the aforementioned Fuji 23mm or 33mm, this is about 14 millimeters wider and longer and about 200 grams heavier than those lenses. And so as a byproduct, I would say that if you're shooting with one of Fuji's larger bodies, for example, I did this review on the X-H2. This lens is a beautiful fit on the X-H2 because it's essentially a full frame size lens, and the X-H2 is pretty much a full frame sized body. And so if you're shooting with the XT series, it's probably going to be okay. But if you're shooting with one of the very compact cameras, you're probably going to find this a little bit front heavy. And so I would say the fit is going to really depend on a couple of things: the size of the camera that you're using, and also your tolerance for slightly heavier and larger lenses. Personally, I didn't really notice the size all that much, but then again, I'm shooting on a bigger body, and I'm also comfortable with larger lenses. Your mileage may vary. Now this mostly follows the pattern established for the 75mm lens, with one exception, and that is that I did note with the 75mm and X mount, it kind of changed the typical convention on Fuji where we never see a lens-based AF/MF switch. Typically that's reserved for the lever or button that's on the camera to switch between those things. But there was an AF/MF switch on the 75mm. That's now absent, and frankly, I wish that it wasn't, because I still prefer the lens-based switch for AF/MF, as I just find it to be the most logical place to control that function. And of course, you know, a muscle memory of going back for, you know, a long time as a photographer now. I'm used to having an AF/MF switch, and so that's one of the things on Fuji that I do miss. It's not here at this point. However, there are other features that continue this kind of Pro Series grade of build, and it actually is a beautifully built lens. It does include the lens hood, as you can see here, and it does include a lens pouch as well that is pretty much just like Canon's old L series pouches. But the one thing I will say about the lens hood itself, it does bayonet into place. It does click when it arrives there, but the kind of the whatever spring action that holds it tight there, it could be tighter because it doesn't take a lot of effort to dislodge it. In fact, sometimes in putting it down into the camera bag, I have had it kind of start to pop loose. So I would prefer just a little bit tighter tolerance there, but the lens hood itself gets the job done, no issues there. This lens does come with the aperture ring that we've come to expect here. You can do 1/3 stop to tenths, and you can go into the automatic mode there at the end if you prefer to not use an aperture ring. There is nothing like an aperture lock, nor is there the ability to declick the aperture, something that seems to be a Fuji specific thing. Again, it's a feature that I just haven't seen on any Fuji lenses, and when we saw the Sony E-mount version of the 75mm lens, it did have the ability to declick the aperture. It had that AF/MF switch, and it even had a Sony style focus hold button. So unfortunately, here on Fuji, I think we're going to get the stripped down version of the lens and a little bit more feature rich on some of the other platforms. And I think that really, you know, maybe there needs to be a shifting standard, I think, on Fuji, particularly when it comes to declicking aperture, as they position more and more of their bodies to be able to do great video capture. The ability to do aperture racking is, you know, kind of a thing that some people would like to do. So I'd like to see that change. That's not really on Viltrox. They're just following what is the Fuji standard for lenses at this point. It does have a thorough weather sealing. I haven't seen the cutout yet. I've been reviewing a pre-release copy, but what I did see with the 75mm is there was about 9 seal points throughout, along with, of course, the gasket at the end, and what they call a nano HD coating on the front, which functions similarly to flooring, and then it makes it easy to clean and avoiding fouling. So I suspect that we'll probably see when that diagram comes. I wouldn't be surprised if there are 7 or 8 seal points, at least one less because there's no AF/MF switch on this. But it seems to be a thoroughly weather sealed design, and so that's great. One improvement that I did see relative to the 75mm is that everything here is, you know, as before, everything is in metal, including that manual focus ring. So the focus ring itself felt great on the 75mm, but I did notice some visible stepping as I did the input. Focus by wire, as all mirrorless lenses are, you know, are autofocusing mirrorless lenses, I should say. But what I noticed is that there were some visible steps as you tried to manually focus. The focus action is much better here, and that we don't have any of that visible stepping, and the damping is actually really nice. This is actually quite a good manual focus experience for focus by wire, and I didn't have any kind of objections to it at that point. They continue to include a USB-C port at the lens mount, which is very welcome. It allows you to do direct firmware updates, and we did see with the 75mm that autofocus dramatically improved through a few subsequent firmware updates. I don't think those are going to be as needed here because they've refined the autofocus performance a little bit more. There's less to correct at this point, but at the same time, I certainly welcome that because it makes the lens more future-proof, and that they can always release a firmware update to assure compatibility or to make improvements as necessary. Inside we have 11 aperture blades, which is very nice because it helps to keep a very circular shape here to the aperture iris as you stop it down, as you can see here. And one other really welcome improvement is something that I've been harping on with Viltrox lenses from day one, and that is they've never had a very good minimum focus distance and maximum magnification figure. They've always seemed to be stuck at 0.10 times, which frankly is not a lot of magnification. we have a pretty dramatic improvement here where the minimum focus distance is 28 centimeters, but the maximum magnification jumps to 0.15 times. Now that's nothing exceptional, obviously, but for Viltrox, it's a huge step forward. And as you can see here, if we compare the 75mm and the 27mm, the amount of magnification that is there is dramatically different. So that's very welcome to me because it just opens up different photography styles and different ways of approaching a scene or a subject. And I really enjoy close focus abilities, also great obviously for video as well. And so all of that is very welcome. So in conclusion of the build and the handling, it is a very nicely executed package. It is very consistent with Fuji standard. I just wish that Fuji standard included a few more of the features that I'm seeing more commonly on other platforms. And I suspect that when we see the Sony E-mount version of this lens, it will have those features that I'm referring to. Autofocus once again comes from a lead screw type STM motor. Now, lead screw type are the more robust STM motors. And fortunately here, I don't really see a whole lot of stepping. And so that's great. I would love to see them move on to something like linear motors, just a little bit more sophisticated focus. But overall, this focus system actually seems to work really quite well here. As noted, the at least initial autofocus performance of the 27mm is definitely better than it was on the 75mm, which kind of stood out as being a bit of a weak link in that while autofocus was good and consistent for portrait type work, I didn't find it as good in other settings and certainly not in video settings. This is a less demanding focal length, obviously, but I think also the autofocus system, it reflects some of the lessons learned over the last 9 months, and so it's a little bit more sophisticated in performance. It was able to track at least mild action just fine. I could, snap to shots and get them, for example, there's some indoor cricket taking place, not a great idea, by the way, and so it was able to snap to focus on the subjects without any kind of issue, and so I could definitely tell that there was more speed for acquiring subjects in this particular lens. The autofocus for, slower type pace things was pretty much flawless. In an event type setting, even if I was shooting from a distance at f1.2, I was getting perfect lock on the subject, be it a speaker or a musician, and they were just really great autofocus in that setting, which is great, and so allows you to actually shoot at that large maximum aperture and thus keep your shutter speed down, get cleaner looking images, all of those things. And so I really appreciate that. I also thought it did a great job in those aforementioned family type settings or group type settings where you're just taking photos of people interacting and having fun together, and it just locked on the eye. It did what I needed to do, zero problems, and I really appreciate that. Now, when it comes to the video side of things, it is mostly positive here with just a little bit of a mixed bag. So when it comes to the focus pulls were definitely better looking than what I saw on the 75mm. They are, as you can see, the transitions are good and snappy, but there is that little bit of a pulse, kind of a settling pulse right when you acquire focus. And that's particularly at the end where I have the glass camera figurine, because that is a little more ambiguous a subject, and so I found that it wasn't quite as confident locking on that. So there's a little bit of a pulse there. But you can also see that there is some pretty obvious focus breathing. And so that does draw attention to focus transitions in a way that a lens with low focus breathing would not. Likewise, when I was just doing shots where I was just kind of moving along and wanting focus to move from one subject to another, you can see that it did pretty good, but if there was a bigger focus change, that focus breathing was kind of a slightly jarring look, and that it's a really obvious focus change. And so the focus breathing would be the shortcoming here. The actual focus moving from one subject to another was really quite good. It also did a good job in my hand test, though again, you'll see it's the focus breathing that kind of draws attention to the focus change in a way, again, that a lower focus breathing lens would not do. But overall, I would say that autofocus is definitely better than what I saw on the 75mm, even before any kind of firmware updating. And I think that the lens is, pretty comparable to other X mount lenses that I'm using. A lot of these flaws are things that I pretty commonly see on Fuji's platform. And as I saw with the 75mm and E mount, focus was just a lot more sophisticated because the autofocus system in camera was more sophisticated. And that's an area where Fuji's still playing a bit of catch up at this point. But for a X mount lens, I thought autofocus performance was really quite good. So how about the image quality? That was really what set the 75mm apart. It was a special lens optically and was one that was able to keep up with the 40 megapixel bodies like the XH2 here or the XT5, and I'm sure other bodies to come. It joined a very short list of lenses that I thought are really capable of resolving that huge pixel density. This is the equivalent of a 90 plus megapixel full frame sensor. So it's a lot of demands on the optical performance of a lens. So can this lens keep up as well? Well, the short answer, as you're going to see, is going to be yes. I will point out that I did note that I thought there was some kind of change to the optical glass when the 75mm came out, and it turns out that that is true, that they are now starting to source some of their optical glass from the Japanese company Hoya, and I think it makes a difference, not just in the overall performance, but also the color rendition that is really a step up. So there's the MTF chart for this lens looks fantastic, as it did for the 75mm lens. And so we're going to dive in and see if this lens can live up to what the MTF chart suggests. Let's take a look together.
So we'll start by taking a look at vignette and distortion. Now on the distortion front, there's basically nothing to see. You can see here already right out of the box that there's basically no distortion, and in fact, if I tried to correct in either direction, I actually introduced more than what was actually there, and so not a problem there. You can see some definite vignette that starts in the corners and then it heads towards the middle of the frame. I used a plus 69 in correcting at f1.2, and so that's just about 3 stops. And as you start to stop the lens down, the vignette does diminish, although it doesn't entirely go away. I will say, however, this is about average, and as far as the distortion goes, it's a lot less than competing lenses. Now, I didn't feel like the lens was completely free of longitudinal chromatic aberrations. There is a little tiny bit of fringing, as you can see in this shot here, though you can see it also is not affecting contrast, that it looks quite good here on the plane of focus. And so overall, no major issue there with fringing, but it's not like apochromatic levels of zero fringing either. I saw very little of the lateral chromatic aberration near the edge of the frame. You can see at this very high magnification, there's the tiniest bit there along some of these lines. This is without any kind of correction, but there's not enough there that you'll ever see it, and typically this kind of correction is going to be enabled by default, and so whatever might be there you won't see anyway. So as noted previously, we are doing these tests on what is the most demanding platform I currently test on, which is the 40 megapixel APS-C sensor of the XH2. And so here at 200% magnification, so a true torture test, you can see that in the middle of the frame, the results are fantastic. Crisp, detailed, good contrast. Moving off to the mid frame, similarly looks excellent. So you pan down this way, everything is looking really crisp, great detail. And as we move off into the corner, you can see that there is some drop off here, but nothing significant. Now, for some perspective, the sharpest lens that I have used in this class near this is Fujinon 23mm f1.4. Very sharp lens. And you can see, even though we are comparing f1.2 to f1.4, I do think that the Fuji lens has a little bit of a contrast advantage and is rendering similar amounts of detail, but with just a little bit more contrast there. In the mid-frame, the lenses are a little bit more evenly matched, but I do slightly favor the Fuji results. We pan down this way, and in this zone here, I actually favor the Viltrox. Coming down here, on this side of the bill, I would favor the Viltrox. Moving down into the corner, I think that the Fuji's a little bit better, and if we pan on towards the corner here, the edge, I would say that as far as contrast and a slight edge in detail, I give to the Fuji lens. And so the Viltrox, even at f1.2, is very close to the very best in class. At f1.2, you're going to be on the left side and stopped all the way down to f5.6, a typical landscape aperture on the right side. So we can see, looking in the middle of the frame, that there is an uptick in contrast, and obviously depth of field is going to change. Where things are focused, you can see that even at f1.2, it already looks great. And of course, it gets greater still when stopped down to f5.6. And so you can particularly see that as we get towards the edge of the frame, where although it's good, it's much better when stopped down, but already this is a very credible landscape type result at f1.2 on the left side here already, and so very impressive real world results. Where I love this was in an event type setting where I'm trying to keep the ISO down. You can see because I can shoot at f1.2 and get reliable autofocus and also crisp results, there's just no reason to not use it at that, which makes this a very tempting lens for wedding ceremonies or other event settings where you need a wider focal length. I also loved it in this kind of setting, like for family type shots, again shooting at f1.2 because you can get detailed results, well-focused results, and the overall look of images is nice. Now, if we stop down just very mildly to f1.4, you can see that there is an uptick in contrast that is there, just a little bit more detail, which again would close the gap with the Fuji a bit more. Likewise, in the mid-frame, in this zone here, just a little bit more contrast. But what we'll see is that as we start to move down here, we start to see just a little bit of a boost in terms of our contrast level and the detail that's rendered off towards the edge of the frame. If we move on to f2 here on the right side, you can see that there's a significant improvement there in the corner. And again, for some real-world perspective here at f2, if we punch into 100% of magnification level in this shot, you can see that the detail is just beautiful, very crisp, very high contrast. You know, depth of field is still going to be limited here, but where depth of field is, you know, we have plane of focus, everything just looks really fantastic all the way up to the very top of the frame. By landscape apertures like f4, you can see that the corner looks fantastic, the mid-frame looks fantastic. We can pop up here, it looks fantastic. You know, basically anywhere that we look, detail is just looking really, really fantastic. And so, I mean, this is a lens that is just really high performing and is able to produce all the detail that you would look for. Now, on very high-resolution bodies like the XH2, diffraction comes early. So even if we compare between f5.6 and then at f8, you can see already that diffraction is starting to soften the image a bit. And by f16, which is minimum aperture here, you can see diffraction has really basically robbed away all of the contrast. So you're going to want to stay at f8 and larger, if at all possible, and avoid f11 and f16 if you're shooting on a high-resolution body. Now, we've already noted the improved close focus abilities, and as you can see here, that at close focus distances, now I have stopped down to f2 to give me a little more depth of field, but you can see that we're able to get some really nice looking results there. Likewise, here this is at f1.2, and you can see that there's detail along the very edges of this tiny little blossom here. Another shot here at f1.2, you can see great detail and contrast there, and then as you look towards the defocused area, it's very nice and soft. On the bokeh note, I noticed that even with a shot like this, which has a lot of things in the mid-frame, this is where this lens sets apart from some of the other competition. I mean, the detail there is beautiful, as you can see. You couldn't ask for better than that. But as you transition towards defocus, it's not doing anything, you know, particularly ugly or serious outlining. There's a little bit of a swirl effect. You can see there is some of that cat eye effect, but it gives it a little bit of that kind of desirable swirl effect that looks good. Then images like this, just even in the foreground bokeh and then the background, the blur is just really, really beautiful, and it allows some really nice pop to the subject. And even when it comes to flare resistance. Now, a large aperture lens like this, I mean, there is some mixed bag. So in this case, you can see there is a bit of a ghosting artifact that's going to take place. It's also very nice and soft and somewhat artistic. Likewise, in this shot, which I really love, there's a little bit of a veiling effect. And if we look at the video, you can see that that kind of ebbs and flows a little bit. But overall, it's a nice stylistic look. Likewise here, where the sun is mostly blocked and you're just seeing the sun star, which has 22 blades from the 11 aperture blades, it looks quite good, very little there. But if we allow more sun and put it right in the corner, you can see a little bit more of that kind of veiling effect across here. And stop down to f11, some of those, those sunburst blades get kind of long and intrusive. Now, if we go back and forth on video capture, you can see again there are ebbs and flows to that. And so mostly it is if you compose properly, you can avoid it altogether. Any kind of flare artifacts, and what's there is artistic, and it mostly shows up at something like f11, which is not a big deal. If I shoot at f5.6 here, there's very, very little flare artifacts that are there. Where this lens really stands out to me is the ability to blend the high resolution detail here, for example, at f1.2, but then a very nice defocused area. And you can see it just again and again that it's that nice blend of sharpness and softness that makes for some of the most special results. And this kind of stands out to me here, that you've got beautiful detail on null on that narrow plane of focus, but then you've got a really beautiful black background blur. You've got very beautiful color rendition. It just produces really pleasing images.
So as I said in the introduction, this is a lens that I think takes some of the best qualities of the Fuji 23mm, namely that great sharpness and contrast and the ability to, really just perform on such a pixel dense sensor. But then it also takes the nicer rendering quality of the 33mm f1.4 from Fuji that I really thought stood out as having really nice bokeh and overall look of images. I think that this 27mm lens manages to take kind of both of those things and draw them together into one lens. And it really produces images that I like. I like the performance of being able to capture those images and rely on the autofocus in terms of its consistency, and and thus it allows that sharpness to shine because images are properly focused. And so it really is a lens that I'm really quickly learning to love because it's a focal length that I really enjoy, but then it produces these beautiful results in those shots and in those settings, and thus it's a highly attractive lens. It's also a really great value. It comes to market MSRP at right under $550 starting on September 5th. By the way, if you use at Viltrox, their Viltrox store, if you use the code Dustin Abbott, you can get 8% off, and so to bring that cost down even further. But I feel like when you're talking about at least $300, if not more, less than those Fuji lenses, it does present as a really great value when you consider you're not losing anything relative to those. It's just as nicely built, has the aperture ring, it has the good autofocus, it has the weather sealing, it has all of those kind of more premium attributes at a much lower price point. And that makes it really attractive. Now, the people that won't be attracted to this lens are those that really value as compact and lightweight a system as possible. And the reason why you're in Fuji, for example, is you want the advantage of the smaller sensor. In this case, you're really kind of going back to more of a full frame sized lens, and maybe that's not for you. And if so, I completely understand. But if you're more comfortable with a slightly larger lens, this is a lens that produces beautiful results, and it's the kind of focal length that I suspect you'll find very useful. I'm Dustin Abbott, and if you look in the description down below, you can find linkage to my full text review. You can also take a look at the image gallery to see more beautiful photos from this lens. There are buying links there, though, as the lens is just being announced. Take a little bit to populate those, and as I noted, Viltrox puts a moratorium of 2 weeks before any coupon codes work, so you may want to wait until that point if you want to save a bit of money. You can also follow me there on social media, get channel merchandise, become a patron. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and let the light in.